I always knew that my childhood would be different from my sister Allison's. Ever since I can remember, I noticed something wasn't quite right. Our parents were always more interested in her, more proud of her achievements. No matter how hard I tried, I seemed to just be a background figure. I didn't exactly know what was happening, but I felt that somehow she was always the center of attention, and I was just there, trying to keep up. The thing is, I've always been the good girl. I wasn't the rebellious child. I didn't cause trouble, and I never got into trouble. My only goal, since I was little, was to make my parents proud of me. I wanted their applause. I wanted them to see everything I did and say, "Clara, you're amazing." But that's not how things went. Instead, the sparkle in their eyes always seemed to be for Allison. She was younger, yes, but somehow she seemed more interesting, more charming. All their attention was always on her, as if everything she did was more important. And what got to me was that no matter how hard I tried, it felt like I could never get close to what she achieved. It wasn't just about love, it was about recognition. A good grade at school? It was just, that's expected from you, Clara. But Allison, she'd draw something on the wall, and there our parents were, praising it like it was a masterpiece. I, who never needed empty compliments, felt there was no real value in that, just a pat on the back for something done. But the hardest part wasn't just being forgotten. It was seeing how my sister took advantage of it. I was used to being the one who worked hard, who put in the effort, and never saw anything in return. Meanwhile, Allison, with her manipulative ways, always got what she wanted. She didn't need much to draw attention. A smile here, a look there, and everyone was around her. I, on the other hand, went unnoticed, and over time, I realized that it made me more reserved, more closed off. I didn't want to be another person, trying to please and never being seen. So, I got used to hiding. Not that I was unhappy, but loneliness was a constant companion. I felt empty because the things I did didn't matter. Or at least, that's how I saw it. My parents never seemed as proud of me as they should have been. When Allison did something silly, it was almost like it was normal. She could do anything. And in the end, everything would be forgiven. But if I made the same mistake, well, then it was a problem. I couldn't make mistakes. I couldn't fail. That shaped the person I became. A person who's afraid to fail, but doesn't know how to be recognized. I learned to wait for affection that never came, and because of that, I closed myself off more and more. Allison seemed to be the star of the family, and I, just the shadow following her. She had a shine that I could never reach, but that everyone seemed to adore. Inside, I wanted to understand why I couldn't be loved the same way. I grew up like this. Deep down, I just wanted to be someone who mattered. But the truth is, no matter how hard I tried, I was always just another person on the stage where my sister shone. Not that I wished anything bad for her. No, it wasn't that. I just wanted, deep down, for someone to see me, to understand me, for someone to see that I was also trying to be more, trying to be someone worth noticing. But it didn't matter how much I tried, how much I put in. None of it made a difference. And that's how the years went by. I became this person who just watched, waiting for my moment to shine, even if just a little. And then I would wonder, would my life ever have something to tell? Or would it always be this way? Me, the person left behind, while everyone was enchanted by the spectacle of my sister. It was everything I had ever wanted. A perfect wedding. Jason and I had been together for years, and the moment to celebrate it was finally approaching. Every detail had been planned with such care that, for a moment, it seemed like nothing could go wrong. The dress, the venue, the flowers, the guests. Everything was in place for what was supposed to be the most special day of my life. I was excited, nervous, and at the same time, full of hope. This was going to be my big day, and I was determined to enjoy every second of it. But, as it couldn't be avoided, Allison had to be around, like a shadow that never leaves. Deep down, I knew that somehow she wouldn't stay out of it. Since our teenage years, Allison had always managed to make herself the center of attention, even when it wasn't her time to shine. She had this gift, this ability to put herself in front of whatever I was doing, as if it were a reflection of what she had always done in our family. And honestly, I was afraid that this would happen at my wedding. I should have been calm. But something told me that her shine was about to interfere again. Maybe it was just a feeling. Maybe a reflection of the insecurity I had carried for years. And then, the phone rang. It was the baker, with unexpected news. She, with a calm and slightly hesitant voice, told me that Allison had contacted her. Of course, at her request, the baker had been instructed to do something different. Something that clearly wasn't in my original plan. A surprise, she said. A surprise for the big day. The baker didn't know exactly what was going on, but felt something was off. Immediately, my heart raced. The last thing I needed was for my sister to steal the spotlight at my wedding, and I knew she had that power. For some reason, it always had to be her who was the star. Always her who drew the attention. I imagined what she might have planned. A different cake, a decoration, something to steal the spotlight from me. Not that she had any real reason to do it, but I knew her well enough to know it wouldn't be the first time. I was torn between two feelings, wanting to avoid a direct confrontation with her and realizing that somehow I needed to do something to make sure my day was truly mine. I knew that confronting her directly could lead to a fight, something I wanted to avoid at all costs. After all, my wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love, not a stage for family drama. But on the other hand, I knew I couldn't just let Allison do whatever she wanted. I decided not to act immediately, not to talk to her about the cake, not to confront her. It was, once again, my old way of trying not to cause problems, of letting things roll. But at the same time, I was at war with myself, thinking, am I really going to let this happen? Am I going to let her, once again, steal something that is just mine? I still didn't know what to do, but I already knew that deep down. I wasn't surprised. It wasn't like Allison's surprise was something new to me. It was as if I had learned to deal with this kind of thing all my life. I just wanted somehow for my day to be free of it. For it to be just about me and Jason, and nothing else. For just once, it to be my time to shine without having to share the spotlight. The night fell, and I kept going over every detail of the wedding, but the thought of Allison's actions wouldn't leave my mind. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that the people were there to celebrate my love with Jason. But the truth was, deep down, I knew that as always, the younger sister was about to cause chaos. I was just waiting to see how it would unfold. I didn't want to be the one always fighting to keep the peace, but at the same time, I didn't want to be the source of conflict. And so, the wedding approached, and the dilemma of what to do about my sister grew heavier. I wanted the day to be mine. Just mine. No more interference. No more games. Just me, Jason, and the love we were celebrating. But deep down, I knew that with Allison, nothing would ever be simple. The big day had finally arrived. I was still nervous, but also excited, as any bride would be. Everything felt so surreal, as if what I was living was some kind of dream, and I just needed to keep breathing deeply for everything to go perfectly. Jason was by my side, giving me strength, and I felt that, even though anxiety was consuming me, he kept me calm. He was my rock, and nothing else mattered as much as the fact that, after all this time, I was finally marrying the man I loved. But, as always with my sister, drama was about to take over. The wedding happened, and up until that point, I had managed to stay calm. The ceremony was beautiful, just as I had always dreamed. Jason looked perfect. I looked beautiful. And as I looked around, all the guests seemed happy. The flowers, the music, the vows. Everything seemed to be going as planned. What I didn't know, however, was that the biggest surprise of the day was still to come. The reception began, and I was still in that state of happiness mixed with relief. The smiles, the hugs, the joy on everyone's faces. It was then that I saw her. Allison. Walking into the room with a wide smile, the look of someone who had just won the Best Actress award. And right behind her, the cake. The cake the baker had mentioned, a huge one, designed and decorated in such an exaggerated way that it made no sense at all amid the decor I had so carefully chosen. I didn't know what was more shocking, the cake or Allison's look, which displayed a confidence I knew well, that confidence that came from always being the center of attention. But that was just the beginning. She, with that smile she always knew how to use so well, did something that left me speechless. Allison, who always liked to be the center of attention, didn't just steal the focus from the cake, but also made an announcement that, to this day, makes me wonder if it really happened. She, in front of everyone, in front of a whole audience of family and friends, looked around and, with a loud and clear voice, announced that she was pregnant. The room went silent for a moment until people started reacting, some in shock, others trying to understand what was going on. I just stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. It was as if, on my big day, she had decided that everything had to be about her. But it didn't stop there. I was still trying to process the information when, suddenly, something happened that made me realize the day still had more surprises in store. That's when Jared, Allison's ex, walked into the room. I had invited him to the wedding, and I knew his presence would be a shock. In fact, I wanted him there to bring the truth to light. The truth I already knew, but that no one else seemed to understand. And Jared didn't disappoint. When he walked in, the room fell silent. No one expected to see him there. But he came. And he wasn't there to congratulate anyone. He was there to let the truth out. And I knew he would do it in a way that no one would forget. Jared looked directly at Allison, and without hesitation said with a chilling calmness, "You've always been good at manipulating people, Allison. But you can't manipulate me. I know what you did." That moment was tense. What he said left everyone in shock. Allison froze, not knowing how to react. And that's when Jared revealed something no one there knew. Allison had cheated on both, him and Eric, her current husband. Silence took over the room, as if the world had paused for a moment. I could see the look on Allison's face, that look of someone who didn't know what to do, as if she had been caught red-handed. The room turned into a scene of chaos. Eric, Allison's husband, was so furious that he couldn't control himself. He stood up from his chair, pointing at Allison and shouting, not caring who was there. "You lied to me. You cheated on me," he yelled, his voice full of pain and anger. It was as if all eyes were on her now, and she had no way of escaping. Looked at my parents who were sitting at the table in the back staring at me. Without a word, they silently accused me, as if I were responsible for the chaos unfolding there. I could feel their pressure, expecting me to be the peacemaker, as I always had been. But at that moment, I didn't care anymore. Allison, who had always been the star of our family, was finally being exposed. The rest of the reception was a whirlwind of reactions, shouting, and accusations. But as the drama unfolded around me, a strange feeling took over me. Relief. As much as the chaos was taking over my wedding, as much as the day was completely ruined, I knew that the truth had finally come to light. I was tired of living in Allison's shadow. Tired of being the good girl who never had her moment. But now, in the middle of all that confusion, something changed. I was closer to getting the freedom I had long needed. The day was far from perfect, but at least it was mine. And deep down, I knew that somehow this would be the last time Allison stole my space. The chaos of the reception still echoed in my mind, even after everyone had dispersed and the party turned into a silent battlefield. I was alone in a corner, trying to process everything that had happened. Once again, Allison had managed to turn everything to her favor, but this time it was different. I knew what had happened. There wouldn't be something that could be ignored. Not this time. The anger and shame from the entire episode began to take over me as time passed. I had prepared for this moment, for the wedding, but no one had warned me that it would come with so much mess. I looked around, trying to find Jason, but he was in the midst of the turmoil, trying to deal with what had just happened. It was a night full of shouting, crying, and accusations, but by the end, most of the guests left in silence, still trying to understand what had just occurred. I, on the other hand, was in some kind of limbo. As much as I had hoped for Allison's truth to be exposed, I hadn't expected the reaction to be so strong. What she did, throwing herself in front of everyone, presenting the cake as a gift, and then making a pregnancy announcement, was something no one could have anticipated. And in the middle of the scandal, Jared's revelation about her betrayal with Eric was the last straw. Eric's reaction was so immediate, so violent, that I didn't know what to do. It didn't take long for the consequences to start unraveling. First, it was my parents. They were furious, and it didn't take long before they sought me out. Not to ask if I was okay or if I needed anything, but to accuse me. "You destroyed our daughter. Look at what you've done." That's how my father greeted me, with that expression of anger he always knew how to use. My mother remained silent, but her look was full of disapproval. I knew what she was thinking. It didn't matter what I felt or what was happening in my life. To them, I was always the one responsible for keeping the peace. And in that moment, I had broken that peace. I had exposed Allison's truth, and to them, that was unforgivable. I stood there, listening to their harsh words, not knowing how to respond. I knew that if I opened my mouth, what would follow would be a war of words. So, I stayed silent. It was hard to process everything that was happening, especially because I had never been the rebel in the family. I was always the good daughter, the one who tried to please, the one who always found a way to keep everyone happy. But in the end, I realized it would never be enough. Apparently, pleasing others was no longer important. What mattered now was that I was finally living my life, even if that meant facing their disapproval. And Allison? She was even more distant. I didn't know what she was thinking, but she was certainly furious. She didn't like being unmasked, losing control of the situation. Even pregnant, she couldn't hide her rage. I knew she hated me in that moment, and it wouldn't be long before she tried to turn everyone against me. I was already expecting that. It was the old Allison, manipulative, trying to make everyone feel guilty for her, as if the victim was always her, no matter what she had done. And it didn't take long for her retaliation attempt to begin. I received the first text messages the very next day. It was a mix of accusations and manipulative moves. The first one came from my mother. "You should have stayed quiet. This isn't something a sister does." I tried to ignore it, but each word cut like a blade. And then the messages from Allison started coming. A series of insults and accusations that I was trying to ruin her life, that I was just being vengeful for something that even she didn't know what it was. But I knew exactly what she was doing. It was an attempt to shift the focus, to transform the narrative so everyone would see her as the victim. It was hard to stay calm. I felt the weight of it all on my shoulders. But at the same time, something inside me was igniting. I couldn't let her pin the blame on me anymore. I wasn't the person who always gave in. I wasn't the Clara who, in the past, would have tried to fix everything to please everyone. I wasn't going to do that again. The worst, however, came when Eric entered the scene. He sent me a message, not to ask how I was, but to accuse me. "You did this to embarrass me, didn't you? Now my life is ruined." I tried to understand, but he didn't want to hear anything. I was to blame for everything. I was responsible for everything getting out of control. He was so caught up in pride and anger that he didn't even bother to see what had actually happened. What he didn't know, or didn't want to know, was that Allison had always been the one at fault. She had always known how to manipulate everyone around her, and in the sea of accusations, there was one person who remained silent. Jason. He knew what I was going through, but he also knew I had to face it alone. There was nothing he could do to fix it. And despite all the confusion, he gave me something I had never had before: space. He knew I needed time to process everything. He knew that even though I felt lost, I needed to go through it on my own. And that's what made me start seeing things differently. As much as others wanted to push me into a life of guilt and suffering, Jason reminded me that I didn't need to carry that burden. And maybe it was time for me to let everyone deal with their own problems, without me sacrificing myself for them anymore. Now, what I needed was to make a choice: follow the path of guilt, or finally live the life I deserved, even if that meant cutting ties with my own family. When I thought the worst was over, I was surprised by yet another series of moves from Allison. I knew that after the revelation at the wedding, things wouldn't just go back to normal. But I never imagined she would use everything to her advantage, with such intensity. Each day that passed, she seemed more determined to turn the world against me. And the worst part was that she was succeeding. The first thing that happened was a message from my mother. She had always been the first to reprimand me, always trying to keep the peace in the family, even if that meant ignoring Allison's manipulations. In the message, my mother asked, almost like an order, that I go to her to resolve the situation. She wanted me to apologize to Allison, to reconcile the family. The message was full of recriminations, as if I were the only one responsible for everything that had happened. It felt as though my life had suddenly turned into a soap opera, and I was supposed to be the heroine fixing the villain's mistake. I was already tired of this. I knew I couldn't give in again. I couldn't go back to being the good daughter who did everything to please. The problem was, as always, the expectations of my family were clear. I was supposed to be the one to fix the chaos, even if the chaos had been caused by Allison herself. But Allison didn't stop there. Soon after, messages started appearing in the family's WhatsApp groups. She began spreading lies about what had happened at the wedding, trying to make it look like I was acting out of revenge. She said I had ruined her wedding, and that in reality, my own wedding was a facade, a stage for my ego. As if that weren't enough, she also insinuated that I was manipulating people around me to make her seem like the villain. Within hours, everyone began to look at me as if I were the one to blame for a situation I hadn't created. I knew Allison had a talent for manipulation, but I never imagined she would be this effective. She had a way of convincing people that she was always right, that everything she did was justified. And soon, her version of the events was gaining strength, while I was seen as the traitor. My own family began to distance themselves, and the pressure was mounting with each passing day. Then came social media. Allison didn't hesitate to use that battlefield. She posted a series of pictures on Facebook with old photos of us, accompanied by captions that made me seem like the villain of the story. She painted me as someone selfish, who only thought about herself, using the wedding as proof that I wasn't concerned with anyone but me. All the while, she continued to sell the idea of herself as the victim, a pregnant woman abandoned and wronged by everyone around her. At that moment, I felt completely cornered. As much as I knew it was all a lie, The way she manipulated the situation was impressive. Each of her posts felt like a stab, and each comment supporting her was like a confirmation that maybe I really was the one responsible for everything. I wanted to ignore it all, but the truth was, it was consuming me. I didn't know what else to do to protect my image, to keep my peace. However, Jason, my husband, was the only person who remained by my side unconditionally. He knew how I was feeling, and his presence gave me the strength to continue. Despite the constant pressure from everyone around me, he reminded me that the truth was on my side. He always told me not to let Allison's lies and manipulations affect me. But deep down, I knew the drama was just beginning. What worried me the most was how it was affecting my mental health, how I was being forced to deal with a situation I had no part in. And then, at that moment, I decided to act. I could no longer wait for things to resolve themselves. I knew the only way to put an end to this story was to expose once and for all everything Allison was doing. I needed to show people that she was lying. Not out of revenge, but to protect the most important thing I had, my peace. That's when I began gathering evidence. I started taking screenshots of her Facebook posts, of the messages she had sent to the family, and even of the manipulative messages she was sending to my parents, trying to turn everyone against me. I knew that when the time came, I would have everything I needed to finally put an end to it all. I wouldn't be a victim of her manipulation any longer. The thing was, no matter how much I tried to focus on what I was doing, there was always that feeling of being watched, of being judged by everyone. The feeling that, no matter how much I proved the truth, people might still believe Allison's lies. But at the same time, something inside me was growing stronger. I could no longer hide behind it. I was no longer the good daughter who sacrificed herself to keep the peace. What gave me more peace of mind was knowing that soon I would have what I needed to end Allison's false narrative. And maybe, finally, I would be able to have the life I always wanted. Even if that meant cutting ties with my family. Even if it meant facing more challenges along the way. I knew I was closer than ever to a truth that could no longer be ignored. All that was left was one thing. Wait for the right moment to take the next step. And when it arrived, I would do whatever I had to do. As the days passed, I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions. Allison's manipulations, my mother's accusations, and all the pressure from the family began to weigh heavily on me. I knew I couldn't keep going like this, but the pain of cutting ties, of letting go of a part of my life, left me hesitant. After all, family should be a safe place, right? It shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be a constant battle. But it was. I thought a lot about everything. I spent hours in silence, alone in my room, reflecting on what was happening and what I truly wanted for my life. I wasn't willing to be the family's scapegoat anymore. I didn't want to be the one who always tried to please, who always put others first, even when that meant ignoring my own needs. It reached a point where, if I didn't start thinking about myself, there would be no one left to think for me. The first thing that came to mind was how unbalanced the family dynamic had always been. Since childhood, when Allison was always the favorite and I was the good girl, I noticed that no matter what I did, my approval was never enough. And no matter how hard I tried, the scales always tipped in her favor. Allison had a way of manipulating situations, making everyone around her feel guilty for her actions. I was always the one who had to clean up the mess, the one who had to fix what was wrong, even when the problem came from her. But this time I wasn't willing to fix anything. I didn't want to be the person who, at any cost, avoided confrontation. It no longer mattered what others thought. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself to please someone who, at no point, cared about how I felt. It wasn't just about the lies she was spreading. It was about everything she had always done to me and to others, and how she always managed to escape the consequences. It was then that I realized the real change had to come from me. It wasn't the first time I'd felt alone, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But I knew this loneliness was a price I had to pay to finally have the freedom I deserved. The freedom to be myself, without worrying about the expectations others tried to impose on me. The freedom to live my life alongside Jason, without worrying about what my mother or sister thought of my choices. Deciding to cut ties wasn't easy, and it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a big step, and I knew that, by doing it, I might lose a lot. I could lose the acceptance of my family. I could lose the support I always thought I would have. But the truth was, for so long, I had been the one giving everything I could, while no one was willing to give the same in return. I never had what I truly needed. I never had the understanding or genuine support I needed. I began to see that my happiness didn't depend on their approval. And while the pain of cutting those ties was great, a part of me felt it was a necessary pain, something that had to be done, not to distance myself from everyone, but to get closer to myself. Jason was my biggest support through this process. He knew what I was going through. He knew how much it hurt me. But he never pressured me to do anything I didn't want to do. He was always clear about one thing. My happiness was what mattered. And more importantly, he was with me, no matter what choices I made. Over time, I started making more decisions. I began distancing myself from social media, especially Facebook, where Allison and my mother were most active in spreading lies. I started blocking those who were trying to turn everyone against me. It was a process of letting go and of finding more peace. I needed to focus on what was within my control, not on what was outside of it. I could no longer live in the shadow of what my family wanted for me. I had the right to choose what was best for me. The hardest part was, without a doubt, facing the guilt I felt for distancing myself from my family. I was raised with the concept that family should always be united, that we should never cut ties. But, as I reflected, I realized that sometimes true unity doesn't come from unconditional tolerance, but from the courage to move forward, even when it means breaking certain ties to protect our mental health and our peace. Finally, the decision was made. I would no longer yield to the weight of my mother's expectations, nor to Allison's constant manipulation. I had to move on. I could no longer allow their toxic behavior to dictate the course of my life. And that didn't mean I hated them or wanted them out of my life forever. But, as difficult as it was, I needed some time away from them. I needed to focus on myself, on my choices, on my happiness. In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson I learned was that to live the life you truly want, you have to be capable of making tough choices. And, as painful as those choices may be, you have to trust that by making them, you are preparing for a much healthier and truer future.